Have you ever wondered how over 100,000 musicians, including countless heavy metal legends, were taken too soon by a silent, deadly disease, leaving the stage forever and silencing some of the most powerful voices in rock history? From the haunting voice of Peter Steele to the raw power of Ray Gillen, here are 25 heavy metal stars who died of immunodeficiency. 1. Peter Steele. The deep voice behind Type O negative was Peter Steele. His music mixed dark and sad sounds with heavy metal. He was tall and looked scary, but people found him interesting. He started in a band called Carnivore, which was loud and wild. Later, he made songs that were more sad and beautiful, like in the albums Bloody Kisses and October Rust. But Peter had problems. He struggled with substances and sadness. Sometimes he disappeared from the public, and people worried about him. His strong body became weak, and rumors started to spread. In 2010, the news broke. Peter Steele was dead. The official reason was heart failure. But some believe there was more to the story. Did he hide an illness? Was there something people didn't know? His death remains a mystery, and his deep voice still haunts the world of heavy metal. 2. Ray Gillen. The amazing voice, strong, rough, and full of energy, belonged to Ray Gillen. When he joined Black Sabbath, he made sure people noticed him. Even though he didn't stay with the band for long, his talent was clear. Later, he joined Badlands, where he mixed blues and hard rock to make powerful music. But something was wrong. He started to look sick. He stayed away from the public, and people whispered about his health. In 1993, the truth came out. Ray Gillen had died. The cause was immunodeficiency, but not many people had known he was sick. At that time, many were afraid to talk about the disease. His death was heartbreaking. He had so much more music to share, but his story ended too soon. His voice still lives on in the songs he left behind. 3. Robin Crosby. The definition of glam metal excess was Robin Crosby. As Rat's lead guitarist, he created the powerful riffs that shaped the band's biggest hits. With his long blonde hair, towering height, and rock star charisma, he became a Sunset Strip icon. To the world, he had everything, but behind the scenes, things were falling apart. Crosby's downfall was slow but steady. Substances, especially opioid, took over his life. As the 90s came, grunge pushed bands like Rat aside, leaving him lost. Then he got devastating news. He had human immunodeficiency virus, likely from sharing needles. Unlike many, he didn't hide it. He spoke out, warning others about the dangers he had ignored for too long. His health declined fast. Years of substances weakened his body, and immunodeficiency made it worse. By the early 2000s, he was barely a shadow of his former self. He passed away at 42. The official cause was an opioid overdose, but the truth was more complex. Immunodeficiency had already drained his strength long before that final hit. 4. Paul Raven. More than just a bassist, Paul Raven was the backbone of industrial metal. His heavy mechanical sound helped create some of the darkest and most intense music of his time. Born in Wolverhampton, England in the 60s, he was drawn to punk's energy and metal's raw power. Soon, he found himself at the center of something bigger than he ever expected. In the early 80s, Raven joined Joke, replacing their original bassist. His arrival changed the band's sound, bringing a new level of aggression and darkness. His first album with them, Fire Dances, helped define their legacy. But he didn't stop there. Over the years, he played with major bands like Ministry, Prong, and Godflesh. His bass lines were thunderous, his stage presence unforgettable. But his life off stage was chaotic. He lived fast, partied hard, and struggled with personal demons. His reputation for wild behavior followed him everywhere, but so did his undeniable talent. Then, in 2007, while working on music in Switzerland, everything ended suddenly. Raven died of a heart attack at just 46. At first, people blamed his hard partying lifestyle, but later, the truth surfaced. Complications from immunodeficiency had played a role. It was a secret he had carried alone. 5. Mick Ronson. A great guitarist who helped shape rock music was Mick Ronson. He wasn't just a player. He mixed rock, classical, and theater to make something special. Born in the 1940s in Yorkshire, England, He first trained in classical music before jumping into hard rock. His path was set from the start. Everything changed when Ronson met David Bowie in 1970. He became the lead guitarist for the Spiders from Mars and helped create the powerful sound of the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. His Les Paul guitar screamed with emotion, his solos full of life. He didn't just play the guitar, he controlled it. But Ronson wasn't just a glam rock guitarist. He worked with Lou Reed, co-producing Transformer, and played with Ian Hunter, Bob Dylan, and John Mellencamp. His own music showed his talent, blending blues, classical, and rock. Still, many only saw him as Bowie's guitarist instead of a star on his own. In the early 1990s, Ronson's health got worse. Even when he was sick, he kept making music and inspiring others. In 1993, he passed away at 46 from liver cancer. Some believe immunodeficiency also played a role, but he never talked about it publicly. His death shocked many. He had been a quiet but powerful force in rock music. His influence still lives on, though many musicians may not even know his name. His legacy remains in the sound of rock and the artists he inspired. 6. Freddie Mercury. More than just a singer, Freddie Mercury was a legend. His voice mixed rock power with opera, making Queen one of the greatest bands ever. Born in the 1940s on the island of Zanzibar, he seemed meant for greatness. As a teenager, he moved to England, drawn to music and performance. With Queen, Mercury pushed every limit. Bohemian Rhapsody changed music, mixing rock and opera in a way no one had before. From the stomping beat of We Will Rock You to the emotion of Somebody to Love, his voice had no boundaries. On stage, he was electric, owning the crowd like a king. But behind the lights and wild performances, trouble was brewing. Mercury's life was full of excess and secrets. By the mid-1980s, rumors about his health spread. He got thinner and performed less, but he stayed silent. In November 1991, he finally admitted he had immunodeficiency. One day later, he was gone at 45. His death shook the music world. Mercury had seemed larger than life, untouchable. His passing brought awareness to immunodeficiency, helping break the stigma around the disease. The Freddie Mercury tribute concert brought rock legends together to honor him. Jobriath. Some stars shine too bright and burn out fast. Jobriath was one of them. A piano prodigy as a child, he had talent beyond his years. But when he stepped into the rock world in the early 1970s, the world wasn't ready for him. Jobriath was bold, glamorous, and theatrical. His music mixed rock, cabaret, and drama. Big billboards announced him as the next big thing. But fame can be cruel. His open queerness made him an outsider in rock, where masculinity ruled. The same industry that once praised him turned away. Left with no support, he performed in small clubs, struggling to survive. By the early 1980s, illness shadowed his life. When he died, barely anyone noticed. But time has a way of changing things. Decades later, people rediscovered his music. The world that once rejected him began to celebrate his legacy. Today, his voice is louder than ever. 8. Dee Dee Ramone. If punk had a pulse, it was Dee Dee Ramone's bass. He was the wild energy behind the Ramones, shaping a sound that inspired countless bands. His life was full of chaos, and that chaos lived in his music. Dee Dee wrote raw, fast, and fierce songs. He poured his struggles into every lyric. Beneath the noise was a man battling pain, addiction, and a troubled past. His restlessness led him to a strange turn. He tried hip-hop. It didn't work, but it showed his fearless creativity. Eventually, he returned to punk, where his name was already legend. But behind the music, his health was failing. Many blamed his past lifestyle, but the truth was harsher. A disease was taking him down. When he died, the world was shocked. Dee Dee had lived like a firework, fast, wild, and unforgettable. His influence on music is eternal, but his story is a reminder of how even legends can fall. 9. Pete Shelley. Punk wasn't just about anger, it was about emotions, and no one knew that better than Pete Shelley. He wasn't just a musician, He was a storyteller. When he started Buzzcocks, he helped create a sound that was different. Other punk bands were loud and angry, but Shelley's songs were about feelings, love, confusion, and heartbreak. His music was just as powerful, but in a different way. As music changed, so did he. He didn't just stick to punk. He explored electronic music and new wave, but his heart stayed the same. His work influenced many artists who came after him. As he got older, his health got worse. When he passed away, people said it was a heart attack, but later it came out that he had been sick for a long time. That truth only became known after he was gone. 10. Randy Biscuit Turner. Wild, loud, and different. Randy Biscuit Turner was unforgettable. As the singer of the Big Boys, he didn't just play punk, he changed it. In the late 1970s, the Big Boys came out of Austin, Texas with a new sound. Most punk bands played fast and loud, but Turner mixed punk with funk, jazz, and even early hip-hop. The result was a sound full of energy and rebellion. Later, bands like Red Hot Chili Peppers and Faith No More would follow his lead. Turner was just as unique on stage. He wore bright, flashy outfits and demanded attention. His songs like Fun, Fun, Fun and Frat Cars weren't just music. They were statements about freedom and breaking rules. But his rebellion wasn't just in his music. Turner was one of the few openly gay men in punk at a time when it was tough to be different. He didn't hide who he was, even when others wanted him to. That made him a hero to many. Even though the Big Boys never became super famous, their influence was huge. Turner proved that punk wasn't just about noise, it was about being fearless. In the early 2000s, his health started to fail. Still, he kept creating art. In 2005, he passed away. The cause, later revealed as immunodeficiency-related complications, was not widely talked about, but his impact never faded. He showed that punk was about breaking every rule and being true to yourself. 11. Benjamin Orr. More than just a singer, Benjamin Orr was the heart of the Cars. Born in the 1940s, music was always part of his life. When he met Rick Ocasek, everything changed. The Cars weren't just another band. They mixed rock with new wave, creating a fresh sound. Orr's voice stood out, smooth, deep, and unforgettable. He sang some of the Cars' biggest hits, Drive, Let's Go, and Just What I Needed. His singing made these songs timeless. While the Cars used electronic sounds, Orr kept the music grounded with his strong bass lines. His playing gave the band a solid foundation. Unlike Ocasek, who was more eccentric, Orr was calm and cool on stage. He didn't need to show off to get attention. His voice and style pulled people in. But behind the scenes, he worked hard to perfect every note. After the Cars broke up in the late 1980s, he released his own album, The Lace. It was softer, but still showed his talent. Sadly, Orr got sick in the late 1990s. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, but some rumors suggested immunodeficiency-related complications. He kept playing music until the very end, even reuniting with old bandmates for one last tour. He passed away in 2000. 12. Robert Quine. Richard Hell and the Voidoids wasn't a typical guitarist. He didn't play for fame or money. He played for the love of sound. His guitar didn't just make music, it screamed, twisted, and challenged the rules. While punk musicians often played simple chords, Quine added chaos. He used sharp, wild sounds that made his music stand out. Born in the 1940s, Quine had many influences. He loved blues and jazz, especially musicians like Sonny Sharrock. This mix made his guitar playing different from anyone else's. In the 1970s, he joined Richard Hell and the Voidoids. Their album, Blank Generation, became a punk classic. Quine's sharp, aggressive guitar work helped shape the sound of punk rock. But he wasn't just a punk guitarist. He worked with legends like Lou Reed, Brian Eno, and Tom Waits. His style fit into many types of music, but it was always unpredictable. He didn't follow trends, he created them. Even though his music influenced many guitarists, he never became famous. He stayed in the background while others took the spotlight. In the early 2000s, his health got worse. He became more isolated. In 2004, he died by self-inflicted death, but some believe immunodeficiency-related complications played a role. Quine's guitar playing still echoes in today's music. His raw, unpredictable style lives on in rock, punk, and experimental sounds. He may not have been a household name, but his influence is impossible to ignore. 13. Ricky Wilson. Born in Georgia in the early 1950s, Ricky Wilson was not just a guitarist, he was an artist with sound. He helped create the unique style of the B-52s, a band that didn't fit into any one category. At a time when rock music was either loud and fast or flashy and over the top, Wilson did something different. He didn't play heavy metal power chords, but his music still had a dark, mysterious feel. He used unusual guitar tuning, removed bass strings, and made a sound that was both simple and huge. Songs like Planet Claire and Rock Lobster didn't just sound fun, they felt strange, almost like something from another world. His guitar playing was like a ghostly voice in the background. Then suddenly, he was gone. In 1985, at just 32 years old, Ricky Wilson died from immunodeficiency. At that time, the disease was not well understood, and many people were afraid of it. Wilson kept his illness a secret, and even his bandmates didn't know how sick he was until it was too late. His death was a huge loss for music. Though his name isn't always remembered, his style influenced many musicians after him. Ricky Wilson created something new and unforgettable, even if he didn't live to see how far his impact would reach. 14. Billy Lyle. Born in the early 1950s, Billy Lyle was a talented keyboard player and musician from Scotland. He had a special way of making music. His fingers moved quickly over the piano, creating sounds that mixed rock, glam, and something magical. He was part of a band called Pilot. People knew them for their catchy pop rock songs, but Lyle was different. He wasn't just playing music, he was creating new sounds. He combined his knowledge of classical music with a love for new technology, using synthesizers in ways most musicians hadn't yet. His keyboard playing wasn't just in the background, it shaped the music itself. Songs like Magic and Just a Smile showed how much depth he could bring to simple tunes. But Lyle didn't just want to make hit songs. As music changed, he wanted to explore new ideas. He started using synthesizers before they were popular in rock music. When he went solo in the late 1970s, his music was ahead of its time. It wasn't quite rock, but it wasn't simple pop either. Years later, musicians in new wave, post-punk, and even electronic rock would use ideas similar to his. Sadly, by the mid-1980s, he became very sick. He had immunodeficiency, a disease that many people didn't understand back then. He stayed out of the public eye as his health got worse. In 1989, at just 36 years old, he passed away. Many people forgot about his music, and his name was left out of history, even though he had influenced so many artists. If he had lived longer, what could he have done? Could he have connected electronic sounds with heavier rock music? The world will never know, but his music still lives on. 15. Arthur Lee. Born in the 1940s, Arthur Lee was a musician who changed rock music. He was ahead of his time. As the leader of the band Love, he mixed folk, jazz, and electric guitar to create a new sound. His music was different from the happy songs of the 1960s. It was darker and had a warning tone. His most famous album, Forever Changes, was full of tension. It had soft, haunting melodies, but also moments of loud energy. Some of his songs, like 7 and 7 Is, were fast and wild. This song sounded like early punk rock, with hard drumming and strong guitar sounds. It helped shape garage rock and even heavy metal. Lee had great talent, but he did not follow the music industry's rules. Because of this, he never became a big star, but many musicians were inspired by him. Bands like Led Zeppelin and The Damned took ideas from his music. Even though he was not famous like other rock stars, his influence was huge. As time went on, Lee struggled with personal problems. He had trouble with the law, faced addiction, and fought many battles in his life. In the end, he was diagnosed with human immunodeficiency virus, a secret he kept until it was too late. He passed away in 2006. While many underground music fans respected him, the world never fully gave him the credit he deserved. 16. Arthur Russell. Born in Iowa in the 1950s, Arthur Russell was a musician who never fit into one style. He moved to New York and became part of the underground music scene. He mixed rock, electronic sounds, and deep emotions in his music. He worked with famous artists like Philip Glass and David Byrne, showing a unique way of thinking about sound. His music ranged from soft, beautiful songs to loud, layered sounds with distorted cello and deep bass. He mixed punk energy with classical music, making his work feel ahead of its time. But when he was alive, few people noticed his genius. As he got sick in the early 1990s, his music became even more haunting. He kept creating, but his energy faded. When he died, much of his work was unfinished. Years later, people began to discover his music and realized how much he had influenced modern sounds. Today, his name is respected by those who understand that he shaped alternative and experimental music long before others caught up. 17. Patrick Cowley. Born in the late 1940s, Patrick Cowley didn't just make music, he created new sounds. His synthesizers buzzed with energy, and his beats felt alive. He found his place in San Francisco's underground music scene and helped shape a new kind of music that mixed rock's wild spirit with the futuristic sounds of electronic beats. Many call Cowley a dance music pioneer, but his heart was in rock. He took the power of electric guitars and turned it into waves of pulsing synths. Working with bold artists, he added psychedelic and metallic touches that later influenced industrial rock and electronic metal. Just as his ideas were changing music, he became sick. He was one of the first musicians affected by the deadly epidemic of the early 1980s. He died young, in his early 30s, before his music got the recognition it deserved, but his impact never disappeared. His sound lives on in today's electronic and industrial rock music, proving that his vision of the future was right, even if he didn't get to see it himself. 18. Antonio Variações. Portugal had never seen anyone like Antonio Variações. He was bold, colorful, and full of energy. Born in the 1940s, he grew up in a strict world where people did not express themselves freely. But when he traveled to Europe, he discovered punk, new wave, and rock. And these sounds changed him forever. When he came back home, he brought a new style. He mixed Portuguese folk music with electric rock and sang in a way no one had heard before. His music was rebellious, but still connected to tradition. His wild outfits, exciting performances, and refusal to follow rules made him a symbol of freedom. In a time when being different was risky, he stood out. Sadly, illness caught up with him before he could do more. In the mid-1980s, his health failed, and he passed away before turning 40. Portugal did not just lose a singer, it lost a revolution that had just begun. But his spirit lives on, inspiring musicians who dare to be different. 19. Tom Fogerty. Played guitar in one of the biggest bands of the 1960s, Tom Fogerty was part of Creedence Clearwater Revival. His steady rhythm guitar helped create their famous swamp rock sound. Their songs were simple but powerful, and his playing kept them driving forward. But success did not bring him happiness. His younger brother, John, was the leader of the band, and creative struggles pushed Tom out. He left in the early 1970s to start his own music career. He tried blues and hard rock, but he never found the same fame. Meanwhile, his brother kept making history, and Tom was often forgotten. In the 1980s, a medical mistake cost him his health. A tainted blood transfusion led to complications, and he died in the early 1990s. His name is not always mentioned in rock history, but his playing shaped the music of his time. His rhythms are still heard in the songs of bands that followed, keeping his legacy alive. 20. Federico Moura. Born in La Plata, Argentina in the 1950s, Federico Moura was a musician who had a different vision at a time when Argentina was struggling with repression. He wanted to bring something fresh and exciting to music. Instead of following the classic rock style, he created something modern with his band, Virus. Their music mixed new wave, punk, and rock, creating a sound that was both rebellious and stylish. Moura was not just a musician, he was a performer who captured everyone's attention. His unique style and hypnotic voice made him stand out. Unlike many rock stars of his time, He wasn't afraid to break gender norms. His lyrics were playful and full of hidden messages. Songs like Luna de Miel en la Mano became underground hits, filled with energy and attitude. Virus didn't just make music, they changed the way people saw Latin rock. But behind the fame, Mora faced a personal battle. In the late 1980s, he was diagnosed with a disease that many feared and misunderstood: immunodeficiency. Even as his health declined, he kept recording and performing. In 1988, at just 37 years old, he passed away. Though he was gone, his music remained, shaping Latin rock for generations to come. 21. Cazuza. In the late 1970s, Brazil was full of music, but also strict government control. Cazuza, born as Agenor de Miranda Araujo Neto, refused to be silenced. He had a rough, powerful voice and a rebellious spirit. As the lead singer of Barão Vermelho, he shook up Brazilian rock, mixing blues and raw emotion into his songs. His lyrics spoke about love, anger, and freedom, connecting deeply with people. But Cazuza wasn't meant to stay in one place. In the mid-1980s, he left Barão Vermelho to start a solo career. This was when his music became even more personal and bold. He wrote about everything: love, politics, and death. Songs like Exagerado and O Tempo Não Para became anthems, full of passion and urgency. He didn't hide who he was, even when society expected him to. His fearless attitude made him a legend. Then, in 1987, he was diagnosed with immunodeficiency. At that time, people were afraid to talk about the disease, but Cazuza refused to stay quiet. He spent his final years writing, singing, and making sure his voice was heard. His last album, Burguesia, was raw and full of emotion. In 1990, he passed away, but his legacy remained. He was more than just a musician. He was a fighter, a symbol of courage, and a voice that still echoes in Brazilian music today. 22. Charlie Guyenne. Thrash metal is fast, loud, and intense. Charlie Guyenne lived and breathed it. In the late 1980s, Argentina's metal scene was just starting, and Guyenne was one of the first to lead the way. As the guitarist for Lethal, he played with speed, power, and skill. His riffs were sharp, and his solos were fast and full of energy. He wasn't just playing, he was making history in Latin American metal. Lethal's first album, Maza, was pure power. The guitars screamed, and the drums hit like thunder. Songs like A Toda Macha and Warriors showed Guillen's talent. Many thrash guitarists focused only on speed, but he had something extra: melody and technical skill. On stage, he was electric. His fingers moved fast, and his energy was unstoppable. But metal can be a tough world. When Guyenne got sick, he faced it alone. People whispered, and the stigma was strong. Still, he played as long as he could. By the late 1990s, his fight was over. He was gone. He may not be a mainstream legend, but those who heard him play will never forget. His music lives on, a ghost in every powerful solo. 23. Bradley Nowell. Born in the late 1960s, Bradley Nowell was not just a musician. He was a mix of everything. He took punk, reggae, and metal and smashed them together. As the leader of Sublime, he made songs full of rebellion, sunshine, and raw emotion. His music captured the rough side of California life, blending chill rhythms with heavy distortion and sharp lyrics. Nowell had many influences. One minute, he sounded like Bad Brains, full of anger and energy. Next, he was playing reggae like Bob Marley. He didn't just follow punk's simple style. His guitar playing was more complex. Songs like Garden Grove and Same in the End showed how he could switch from smooth reggae to wild, crashing punk in seconds. But behind the music, Nowell was struggling. He fought a battle with opioid, but there was something else. Immunodeficiency had weakened him. His immune system was failing, making his substance use even more dangerous. When he overdosed in the mid-1990s, his body couldn't fight back. He was only 28. After his death, Sublime's self-titled album became a huge hit. Suddenly, Nowell was a legend. His fearless mix of styles changed music forever, inspiring bands across rock, punk, and metal. Even today, new fans discover his music, drawn in by his creativity. But what if he had lived? How much more could he have done? Could he have changed music even more? We'll never know, but his impact is still felt loud and clear. 4. Eazy-E. People called Eazy-E the godfather of gangsta rap because he gave a voice to life on the streets. But he wasn't just about rap. He also helped mix rap with rock, opening doors for future artists. His real name was Eric Wright, and he was born in the 1960s. He helped create the group NWA, which changed rap forever. His songs told real stories, full of raw energy. But Eazy-E wasn't afraid to try new things. He worked with rock musicians like Slash from Guns N' Roses. His record label, Ruthless Records, also supported artists who mixed hip-hop with rock and metal. Then, in the 1990s, tragedy struck. Eazy-E was diagnosed with immunodeficiency, shocking the music world. He died just weeks later at only 30 years old. His death forced people to talk about immunodeficiency, a topic that had been ignored out of fear. Even after his death, his influence didn't fade. More artists started blending rap and rock, leading to big acts like Rage Against the Machine and Linkin Park. If he had lived longer, who knows how much further he could have pushed music. Born in Germany in the 1940s, Klaus Nomi was like a visitor from another world. His music mixed opera, rock, and futuristic sounds. With his high-pitched voice and strange outfits, he looked and sounded like no one else. He later moved to New York, where he became famous for his robotic movements and alien-like costumes. His music was just as unique, blending opera with rock. Even David Bowie noticed him and invited him to perform in the late 1970s. In the early 1980s, Nomi released his first album. Songs like The Cold Song and Total Eclipse were unlike anything people had heard before. He was ahead of his time, influencing glam rock, industrial music, and even theatrical metal. But just as his career was taking off, disaster struck. Immunodeficiency was new and mysterious, and Nomi was one of the first celebrities to suffer from it. He kept performing as long as he could, but by the early 1980s, the disease took his life. He was only 39. Even today, his influence lives on. Many rock and metal artists borrow from his dramatic style. His boldness showed musicians they could push beyond the limits of normal music. What more could he have created if he had lived longer?